Hi, Alan Cox here. Inside of Microsoft Purview, there's lots of ways we can protect our data. There's data loss prevention. There's DSPM for AI if we want to kind of manage some of the AI functionality within the 365 environment. One of the most common is label and classification, and so a label is essentially a tag on a document that has sort of a payload of some controls within it. So watermarking, encryption, and access controls and these sort of things. And so I don't think it's going to take too long of a video today because I just want to walk through some of the basics of setting up a label. In another video, we'll talk about deploying this label and applying it through policy. But right now, I just want to talk about getting the label configured and set up. Um, and look at a variety of options that we have when we do that. And it could also depend on some of the licensing that you have in your environment as well. But we're going to try to cover that from start to finish. I don't think it'll take long, but anyway, hopefully that'll help. And that's going to be our topic today, is creating sensitivity label to help protect our data in 365. Let's get started. All right, here we are in Microsoft Purview, and we are going to go to solutions here, and we're going to go down to information protection. So we're going to look at building a label that can be applied, and using the label apply various protections, whether it's a sensitive information type or whatever the case is. And so we're going to go down here to information protection. If you don't see it there, you can go to explore all the solutions and you should be able to find information protection. And when we get there, we're just going to go into sensitivity labels. Now, sensitivity labels, and here I'll have, I've got some that I have created, and you probably will have some that were created by Microsoft. They may not be deployed by any policy. We'll get into some policies later, but for now, we're just talking about creating the labels. And so I have these labels, and these are labels that will show up in Office documentation, or rather Office documents. And so if I were to just open up a Word document here, for example, and let's bring this open here, we will see that we have a default label. We'll look at that in a little bit, how it's kind of a defaulted label here. But over here with sensitivity, we can see we can drop these down and we'll see these labels here that you see align with and correspond to the labels that we have built here. Okay, and so we'll get to talk about that. The other thing I want to mention here, by the way, there's a lot of information about sensitivity labels out there on Microsoft Learn site. There's plenty of information there, but also you may notice that I have some that have some drop downs here, like internal, confidential, highly confidential. These used to be referred to as parent labels, and so the parent, or the top level, was kind of like a category of, if you will, so like internal, and then maybe I have some HR, finance, specific users, etc. Right? These are now referred to as groups, as label groups. And so they're basically the same as kind of this top level parent sub-label sort of thing, but now they are groups. And so there are some information, there's some information here. When you click here, we can learn more about the modern label scheme. So for now, we're just going to go in, we're not going to create a group, we're just going to create a label. And we're going to call this label here, I'm just going to call this label patient ID. And so maybe eventually we'll target this towards some patient ID. It's going to default to the highest level, priority-wise. And we have to give it a description for the user. So what are these users going to see if they were going to manually apply this label to help give them some ideas? So we might say use when document contains patient information, right? And we don't have to, but I believe you should create just some sort of meaningful description for admins as well. Now, when it comes to colors, you don't necessarily have to apply a color, but I tend to apply a color based on kind of I don't know, maybe the risk of the content that label is protecting. So, for example, for my public label, meaning there's no sensitive information in it, there's nothing, you know, worrisome in the document or what have you, I may choose that to be green. Green light, good to go, whatever. Highly sensitive stuff I may have red. This right here is patient information. I'm going to say it's it's sensitive. And we should safeguard that. So I'm going to give it a kind of an amber here or an orange. We'll just go orange here. I'm going to go next here. Now, here's where we can define the scope of the label. What areas within 365 is this label? Can this label be applied to? Files and other data sets or files, which is pretty typical. Emails, meetings, and this can speak to like Teams Premium stuff where you can apply labels to meetings and so forth. Groups and sites is disabled by default. There's a couple PowerShell commands you do have to run in order to turn this on, and I do recommend that you turn this on so that you can apply labels at the SharePoint site level, also loop workspaces and so forth. And so there's some information about groups and sites, some information there. When this will be grayed out, and you'll have a link to a Microsoft Learn document on how to enable that. It's relatively straightforward, a couple PowerShell commands, if I recall, pretty simple. And so then as far as items go, what do we want? What kind of protection settings do we want? So basically, do we want to just control access? So where this label applies, only these people can have certain levels of access. You can use the label in that way. We can say watermarking. So I want you to put a header or a footer or a watermark somewhere on the document that indicates that this is, sensitive, internal only, confidential, whatever. Protect Teams meetings and chats, and so this is a Team Premium feature here, but I'm going to go ahead and turn all of these on so that we'll be given options to configure them so we can kind of look at everything when we create this label. So I'm going to go next here. Now I'm going to configure the permissions setting now. We can choose to let the users assign permissions. So for example, if a user has a document and they want to make sure that only certain people get access to that document, they can assign a label, and then it will pop up a box that basically says, now assign the permissions of who you want to access this. In this case, for the simplicity, I'm just going to assign the permissions now. We're going to go ahead and assign these permissions. And I'm going to say all users and groups in the organization. So I'm pretty much giving it to everybody. Do understand that any authenticated users and users and groups in the organization can include guest accounts, so use caution there. So, but in any case, I'm just for the simplicity here, I'm just going to say that I'm not really going to edit the permission type. I'm just going to do that, but of course we could do that. And then this dynamic watermarking just allows us to do a watermark on the text. And what it will do is it'll actually watermark the user principal name. I'm not going to do that here because I'm going to actually do it differently because we do have a content marking option here. So this is the access control. So next we're going to do content marking. I'm going to say yes. And that's header here. I'm just going to say, for example, internal only. And I can change the font size. I can change this. Maybe I want this red. I'm going to go ahead and copy this because I also want to add this to the footer as well. So I'm going to customize this text. So now when a document has this label, then it will add a custom header and footer that says internal only in red etc. So we're going to go do there. Could add like a watermark. That'll kind of do a diagonal sort of watermark across the middle of the document. We're not going to do that. So Teams meetings and chats. This is where we can control if the meeting has this label on it, who can bypass the lobby. People dial in can bypass the lobby. So you basically are applying specific like Teams admin controls over that particular meeting. Again, this is a premium feature. And so I'm not going to change anything here, but you can do all of that if you have that and want to control this. Then we get into auto labeling. Now, I'm not going to auto label right now. I'm not going to do any policy right now. We'll talk more about that later. For groups and sites, this is where I'm going to go ahead and check these again because we have privacy for external user, external sharing and conditional access, and Teams discoverability, and share channel settings. So we're going to go through these really quick. So I'm going to say for groups and teams, these are going to be that have this label apply. I want it to always be a private team. I could always make it public or whatever, but I'm just going to say private. I'm not going to allow user or group owners to add people outside the organization because this is a sensitive label, because it's dealing with patient information, right? So I'm not going to check that box. I'm going to go next here. Now we can control external sharing from labeled SharePoint sites. So basically I can say, if this label is applied to a SharePoint site, this is going to be the sharing policy. I can say only people in the organization, so it cannot be shared regardless of the sharing setting that's configured on the site. Then I'm going to use Entra ID controlled access to protect labeled SharePoint sites. Now I want to point this out that basically that if what this will do is essentially work alongside a conditional access policy that basically says a device, if a device is unmanaged devices, then do not allow it to download any information to local storage. It's got to be basically web only. So typically we may do allow only web only access. So so what that means is though that it will create a conditional access policy or work with a conditional access policy that, by the way, if for this setting to work, you must also configure the SharePoint feature that blocks or limits access to SharePoint files from unmanaged devices, right? So let's take a look at this real quick. If I were to go into my admin center and go into real quick, we'll go into policies and access control and unmanaged devices. If I were to click here, allow only limited web access, and then save that, it will create a conditional access policy that basically says if my machine is not on a managed device, if it's an unmanaged personal device or what have you, that it will not allow. Based on that setting, if I do web only, it will allow me to access, say, SharePoint, OneDrive, etc., but it will not allow me to download it to that local machine. Everything stays in the browser. Of course, we can block access, and that modifies the conditional access policy. So that is essentially what this setting here does. We can then go here and next, and now we can say allow users to discover private teams to have as a label apply. I'm going to say no because we want to keep it private and we don't even want it to be discoverable. And then of course shared channels, we can make some selections here, and then once we're done we can go next. It's going to validation failed here, so I'm going to say internal only, and then create the label. And then once that creates that label, it is good to go. And we will, I'll go ahead and just create this label. So it's just going to create the label. It's not going to apply the label. It's not going to do anything with this label other than just create it. We'll talk about applying the label next time, but we'll wait for this to go ahead and finish, and then we'll wrap up there. There we go. We can publish the label. Don't create a policy yet. I do not want to deploy this label. And so there is our new label. And that is it. Up next, we'll publish labels. And so we'll talk about how that works and how that's accomplished. So I hope this has been helpful for you, and thanks for watching.